Honey Valentine, sweet comic Valentine, you make me smile with my heart.
What I really would like is if you would just take a minute or two and share some sort of memory that you have of my dad. So instead of making anybody get up and do the readings or say anything at church or say anything here, we're going to do it nice and informal and private, but we still want to hear what your memories are and be able to, you know, for my family, on behalf of my family, to be able to watch them later.
Hi, I'm Mike Yazerlo. My fondest memories with Pete is when I used to drive him from Wilkes-Barre to Connecticut to their daughter's house. And when I would be driving, Pete would say, "Stop driving so freaking fast." And he would kick my chair. And then after the second time, Vera would hear him and say, "Pete, you stop that right now." And I mean, that's my fondest memories. And he was a great guy. We all miss you.
I am a dear long-term friend of Vera's, and of course through Vera I met Pete. I've known Pete for even longer than through Vera, because when I shopped with my mom at the Acme as a young girl, a very young girl, I would see Pete there and we would talk to him. And after I became friends with Vera and met him, here's Pete from the Acme, who turned out to be her husband. But so I've known him forever. He never changed his appearance. He's always a very pleasant. But my biggest thing for Pete is how good he was to my son Michael. Vera tutored my son Michael for many years, helped him get through school, and Pete was always there for him. And all their life it's been asking me, and they've been there for me. So I will miss him. I will miss his kind, steady face, and of course, Linda and Pete I've known, and Kimberly, and it's been a long, wonderful relationship. Bye, Pete. God bless. I know you're with us today, and you're right here. That's it.
We went down on a visit to Florida. We went to Disney World, and we're having a lot of fun, and it was getting dark. And we went into this watery ride where the shark was there. What was the name of the shark at that time? Jaws. Thank you. And we're going in the boat, and we're having a lot of fun. And Pete's very quiet. He says, "Why don't you sit right over here?" Yeah, I said, "Sure, Pete. Why? Yeah." He said, "You're more comfortable near the edge of the boat." I said, "Okay." So Pete went over that way, Vera went over that way, my wife, and I'm right at the edge of this boat. And we're going along and we're talking, and you hear the music from Shark in the background. And as we're going through this watery, very quiet, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, boom, comes the shark. Scared the bejesus right out of me. I can put a beat. Yeah, okay. And Pete was laughing so hard, he almost fell out of the boat. And Vera was laughing, my wife was roaring, and I'll never forget that as long as that scared the hell out of me. And Pete set it up. He knew he was going to be there, and he got me good. I'll never forget it. Pete, you're a great guy, and I hope you're having a good time up there. I hope there's no sharks up there to bite you.
I lived next door we all did. We're next door neighbors, and we lived together since they built their home and we built ours. And I never heard
before.
Yeah, that's right, when we were renting an apartment. And I never heard Pete raise his voice ever.
In all those years.
In all those years. He was so quiet. Nice.
He was a soft-spoken man, and he was just a pleasure. He used to love to talk to my dad. My dad passed away years ago, Ronnie, and they had a lot of good conversations. And Linda and I went to school together, and Peter was a year younger than us, and we just had a lot of nice years together with our pools, swimming in the backyard, Peter and Linda and I, and Pete was just a great guy. We had a lot of great summers, a lot of good times together, and Pete and Vera were always there and to support us, and just wonderful neighbors, great people.
Yes, they were.
And it was a beautiful service today. It was lovely.
That was.
Oh, it was, especially the military part was just
That was very
so
impressive.
moving. Yeah, it was very nice. And people
Oh,
loved
everybody
that.
was crying.
Yeah, it was lovely. It was a nice send-off for an old soldier.
Yes.
Very nice.
I met Pete in 1969, maybe 67. I worked with him at the Acme, and we had fun together. He worked the produce, and he would always sneak me fruit, and we really enjoyed ourselves. And then we were getting married, so we needed a house, and he found us a house on his street. And he said, "Why don't you come and look at it?" So we did, and when we looked at it, within an hour, we bought the house. And if it weren't for Pete, we would not have known him that close. We would not have known Vera or his children, and we wouldn't know our neighbors that we have today that are here. So I enjoyed being with Pete and having a good time with him in Florida and at our house, and he enjoyed our garden, and just a wonderful, wonderful man. I'm going to miss him. We had some fun times together. It's amazing what he went through. So he deserves, I know he's in paradise, and I'm happy for him.
The best way I remember Pete, and I would describe Pete, would be that he was just a sweetheart. He was just a sweet guy. Now, if this was about Vera, I could go on because Vera's my role model, and she's who I esteem to be someday. But Pete, he was just her sweet husband that always went along with her, do whatever she wanted to do, and he did it happily. So I would say to my husband, you see how Pete is? You need to take a few notes or take a page out of Pete's book, because he goes along, they do everything, and they have a great time, and that's, where I hope to be someday. So,
Vera, you and Pete were meant to be together. We always enjoyed being in your company. You know that. With Pete's personality, his smile, you could talk about any subject with him, and he would smile and he would talk about anything you wanted to talk about. He always made you feel very comfortable.
he was a sweetheart.
Yes, yes. Always welcome. He would always welcome you and anybody in his house. They loved company. They loved to be around people. And we love him. We'll miss him terribly.
We're sad to see him go, but we wish, we're so happy that you got to be together so many years. Again, I hope for that someday.
Really, when it comes to Pete, my general memories are, there's not one specific thing, but my fondest memories are the many, many visits at the house on Thomas Street. I was up there many times because we actually only lived about a mile from each other. And my mom actually was very close with Vera. She'll well attest to that. So I was up at the house many times, and I just remember the many visits with her and my mom, and with Pete in general. And what I remember about Pete most was he always made you feel at home. He was very comfortable to be around him, and he was a very well-read man, because no matter what we talked about, any subject, he knew it. He didn't push it on you, but he was a very well-read man, very, very intelligent, but without being overbearing about it. And he was just a pleasure to be around. He made you feel very much at home. His home was your home, and he was just so easy to be with. And no matter whether it was 2 people there or 10 people there, and he was always accommodating. And very, like you said, the stories he would tell about, talk about in general was just interesting. He was just a good man. He was just a good man. That's the best way that I could put it. And you don't see that much anymore, unfortunately. He was just a good, honest, decent man, and he was a great father. You could tell that with Linda and Peter, and he was just a good friend. And like I said, I'll really miss him. And it was a wonderful service today, and The family did a great job setting everything up. This was wonderful, and it was just really nice. And like I said, it's just there's not one specific thing I can say about Pete. It's just he was a good person to be around.
Pete was Uncle Pete, and Uncle Pete would frequently meet with us every summer because my family would travel to visit Aunt Vera, Uncle Pete, Linda, and Peter to spend our summers together. And we're from New York City, and I think Uncle Pete had a number of reasons to find opportunities to have fun with me. I was a young boy and also from New York, coming to Wilkes-Barre with all its trees and grass and foreign surroundings for a Brooklyn kid. So we had lots of fun together, and there were many times when he would try to tease me or convince me of such matters as there's no plumbing available at the home. But one of my most memorable moments, I suppose, and there's a reason for it beyond the story itself, was that we traveled to Levittown to meet family, Harry Mancia, or Mancha, and Uncle Pete and I were standing in the garden in the back and looking out to the forested area. And he pointed out to me, this young 10-year-old boy from Brooklyn, that in the midst of all these trees there was an Indian totem pole because Indians occupied the territory. And I could not see it, so I could not understand it. And he very convincingly continued to argue that there was an Indian totem pole amidst all these trees. Well, we'll just, fast forward to the future, and I was having a conversation with Anita, who was actually who we were visiting, Uncle Harry's daughter, only about 10 years ago. And we were comparing notes about family contacts, and a trip I was planning to Italy. And after exchanging all that information, Anita turned to me and she said, I remember you visited our home once with Uncle Pete and Aunt Vera, and he was trying to convince you that there was a totem pole out there in the woods. And that was just the biggest chuckle, because obviously it was not my imagination, and Uncle Pete was doing exactly that, and it was just a memory that was reinforced with that discussion with Anita.
Well, I come to the family through marriage, so I got to know Uncle Pete when he was way into his 70s by then, but didn't say very much. But what I observed and learned from him was through example, that he seemed to live his life as a gift every single day, and as though he were a king, and just really feeling blessed. And from that, I take from him that very lesson about life, and that's it.
I knew Pete for 50 years. He was a great guy. He was a good friend. Loved to talk with him. We would sit at his house, for hours and talk. My husband, myself, Pete, and Vera. And we loved him, and we're going to miss him. And Pete, where you are is a good place. Bye, Pete. I'll see you someday. Bye-bye.
My father is Vera, his wife Vera's cousin, and they actually lived together as kids. And also, Aunt Vera and Uncle Pete are my godparents. Yes, they're my godparents through the Catholic faith and all. So my mother and father thought enough of them to make them my godparents. So, which is really cool. Everybody has memories of Thomas Street, the pink house, up on this grandiose hill overlooking the valley. But my biggest memory, which everybody still jokes about, is as a kid going up there and Uncle Pete taking us to go see the bulldozers. Because just down the road were huge coal banks. When I was a kid, they looked like skyscrapers. And there would be these tractors, their tires were higher than the ceiling of this room. And so imagine being a kid who's 7, 8, or 9 years old, and Uncle Pete saying, "Come on, we're going to take a walk and go see the bulldozers," right? My eyes would light up like this. And that memory sticks in my head here, what, 40 years later, 40, 45 years later. Yeah, so that was just a huge memory. Always being up to their house. Uncle Pete liked to kid everybody. He was a kidder. He was a low-key kidder. And the funny part was, he would always have a smile in his eye, or you knew he was kidding because he'd say with a smile on his face and a smile in his eye, you know, what he was joking about or whatever at the time. But not a man of a lot of words, but when he spoke, you know, he said something that really meant something. And he was very motivational to me as far as working hard, being quietly strong, and you know, just being there for the family at all times. Uncle Pete was always there. He's a rock. He was a rock. So it was an honor to know him. Yeah, we'll miss you, Uncle Pete. We love him.
You know, I have known Pete for a long time. I first met him when he came to Hawaii years ago, and I will always remember him with his sparkling blue eyes and bright smile. And a few years ago, I got the opportunity to stay with Pete and his wife Vera, and the family and I just had a wonderful time. He was so good with the kids, and we just really enjoyed talking to him. I thought the service was beautiful, and I thought he really, really deserved the military service. I thought that it was well done, and I think he would be proud. Just want to thank him because he's just a wonderful person.
Well, I went to college with Linda. Linda was my roommate, and I met Pete and the rest of Linda's family my freshman year, probably the first day of school when we were all meeting each other, and visited over the years, both in Wilkes-Barre and in Florida. He's such a calming, steady presence, and just very intelligent and strong, and I really admired that about him. I especially admired his war service and service for the country. Can't thank him enough for that. And when I visited over the years, he and Vera were always so welcoming to me. I visited once over Christmas. Came down from New Haven, and they were so welcoming me into the family, had a present for me, and went to services, and I really appreciated how much they made me feel like I was a member of the family.
Well, it's kind of funny. Me and my brother and Linda Sue and Peter, we used to always go up there when we were little. I'm 55 years old. We've been going to their house since I was born. And all these years we'd go up there for parties, and Uncle Pete and Aunt Vera, that's all we ever knew. Until one day when I got a little older and my mother told me, "That's not your aunt and uncle." And me and my brother were like, "What?" Because we always, and to this day they still are. So happens that Vera was my mother's best friend in high school. So they just became best friends, and since we were little, it was always, they were always our cousins. And Uncle Pete was always Uncle Pete, and Aunt Vera was always Aunt Vera, and it's that way till today. I'll tell you, my mother would yell at us, Aunt Vera would yell at us, my father would yell at us, but Uncle Pete, I could never remember a day him ever yelling at us. He was just a great guy, soft-spoken and just a great guy. Yeah, I loved him. I still love him. They're still our family. And I'll take care of them until I can't do it anymore.
Uncle Pete, fondest memories growing up, my dad, which is Aunt Vera's cousin, okay, so we used to go up and visit them very frequently growing up, and my fondest memories in my life, and still to this day, are our visits with them, sitting around the table and talking, and I remember Uncle Pete taking me for walks down the street, holding my hand, walking me to see all the cranes and equipment down by the coal mine field or whatever it was. Just the best times of my life, best memories with the most wonderful, loving people, and they'll always have a place in my heart. I remember going into my cousin Peter's room, and all his weights would be there, and my cousin Linda, I'd always sit at her little makeup table, and she'd let me play with her makeup, and Aunt Vera just always being the most sweetest, loving aunt, and Uncle Pete just always being so caring. Just the best memories.
Pete was my uncle, and I'm going to tell you a story that goes back into the 1940s. And this is the earliest memory I have of childhood of Pete. And what it was that my father went to the hospital to have a procedure. It was actually just a skin procedure that at that time was a couple-day hospital stay. And so while he was having the surgery, my mother went to the hospital to be there. And my sister and I was about 3 or 4, and I know that because of the car that Pete had. Pete had a 1940s Chevrolet, and so he drove my mother to the hospital to be with my father, and my sister and I, my sister is 5 years older than me, so they were like a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old in the car with Pete, and we were there a long time. And so we were sitting under a tree on the street near this hospital, and so Pete set about to entertain us. And so he told us what every knob in his car did. He left me move the shift lever that was on the column, and did that for a while. When we got too tired or too unruly in the car, he'd take us for a walk around the block, and we'd come back, sit in the car again. And finally, when probably after 2 hours at least, maybe going on 3 hours, when we were really getting unruly, he decided to show us what was in the glove compartment. And what he had in the glove compartment were a couple of candy bars. So he came really prepared to babysit. This was long before he was married. This was just soon after he came back from the Second World War. It must have been maybe 1946, 47. And so with that, we gave us a candy bar, and that worked out very good. And the fact that he had those candy bars hidden as sort of a last resort. But then time went on longer, and my mother hadn't come back yet, and so we were still waiting in the car with Pete. And so after a few more walks around the block and a few other work in the gear shift and a few things like that, he says, "Well, I'll show you the trunk." And so we began to think, when he showed us the glove compartment, he had candy in there. Well, actually, he had more candy in the trunk. So that worked out, and so it just went to show, first of all, the tremendous patience of my Uncle Pete. Secondly, how well prepared he was to be a babysitter at a time when he was just a single young man, and how well that went. And so that's my earliest memory from the 1940s. When I was 3 or 4 years old, I remembered the wonderful kindness of my Uncle Pete in taking care of me while my mother was in the hospital with my father. So that's the first story. The second story I think, is the explanation for Pete's longevity. And the reason for that is that typical of the Godleski family, most people went to visit Grandma Godleski on Sunday afternoons. And Pete, when he was single, lived there, as well as my Aunt Wanda and Uncle Stanley and their family. So it was a big family living together. And so every time we went there, it was usually a Sunday afternoon, and my grandmother only spoke Polish. So my father would say to my grandmother, "Gdzie Petruk?" And that's "Where's Pete?" And my grandmother would say, "Petruk do spać." and that meant that Pete was sleeping. And so, and it seemed that every time we went there, Pete was sleeping. So as a young man, I don't think it was because he partied on Saturday night. He worked, but he also liked to sleep. And he got a lot of extra sleep when he was a young man. And I bet each of those naps that he took added at least an extra month or two to his life. So his ripe old age of 96 and being very much alive and active up until that time, I think reverts back to this time in the 1940s and early 50s when Pete did a lot of extra sleeping. And I think he caught up and stored that energy very well. Now, the other thing got one more. Okay, in addition to my grandmother always say, Petr to spać, my grandmother would also always say, Vish klopsi. And Vish klopsi meant have some meatballs that she was always famous for making and always had them stuck away in the oven. And so if we when we got to Grandma's, the conversation was always Je Petr to spać, Vish klopsi. So I think anybody at the Godleskis that sees this will remember all of those phrases, but Pete and Linda Sue won't, because this was all long before their time. So those are the stories that I have to tell.
My husband is a Godleski, and Uncle Pete and Aunt Vera are his aunt and uncle. And I have a house in Ohio, and I come through Wilkes-Barre on my way to Ohio because that's where I was born. Pete and Vera wanted to go to visit their house, and they were staying at their daughter's house in Connecticut. So I went to Connecticut, picked them up, and brought them in my van out to their house in Wilkes-Barre. And in the back of my van, I have a DVD player that plays videos. And I had The Last Bricklayer, and Uncle Pete sat in the back and watched the video, and he loved it. He thought it was the greatest movie he had seen. And I dropped them off, and I told them, now I'll be back in a week, and I'll give you a call when I'm coming, and I'll pick you back up. And I told them, I feel like I'm leaving my kids at camp. And so I came back and I picked them up and brought them back to their daughter Linda's in Connecticut. But it was such a nice trip. One of the other things we did, we stopped at the restaurant in Milford, which was a favorite restaurant of my mother-in-law. And when she came to Boston to visit, she liked to stop there and eat. So they loved it too. So that was a nice thing to bring more memories. I called him a gentleman and a gentleman. He was both. So I know where he is. He's always right up there in heaven. I know it. He couldn't be anywhere else.
And I'm a neighbor of two very good people, Vera and Pete Godleski and their children, for 40 plus years. And I just want to say how good of the neighbors that they are. And I remember back when people got together more often, when Pete and Vera would bring their chairs over in front of our house, and other neighbors that were next door to them would come over and would spend the whole night talking about the old time. And I'll never forget it. And I want to say to Vera and Pete, Pete and Vera were very, very good people. Thank you.
Well, I'm a neighbor. We live directly across the street from them. So I saw him coming and go. We see each other coming and going all the time. They're very, very nice people. We're going to miss them. We missed him when he went down to Florida. But my daughter My daughter's going to miss him too. She goes over there a lot. He, like my daughter, she cuts his lawn, and he'd always go out there and talk to her. He was very nice to her. They're very nice people.
Pete is my uncle, and we lived in Brooklyn when I was growing up, and our vacation was going to Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania to visit with Aunt Vera, Uncle Pete, and my cousins. I was always thrilled to go there. I loved being there. What I remember about Uncle Pete is his smile. He always had such a lovely smile, very sweet and pleasant. Two things I remember so well is we always shared our birthdays, because my birthday was August 19th and his was at the end. We would always have a little party for the both of us. So thank you, Uncle Pete, for letting me share your birthday. And when I was little, my maiden name was Nancy. And we would laugh because I'd say, Uncle Pete, how come you have a ski at the end of your name? I guess I used to tease him, and then he used to tease me back, and he'd say, Marianne, we have to change your name. We have to put a ski somewhere. So then it was Marianne Ski ever since then. So whenever I would see him, even today, he would call me Marianne Ski. So those are my fond memories. There are so many of Uncle Pete. He was so sweet, and I think I had this little nurse's kit with a stethoscope. And how appropriate now that my cousins are both doctors. But so I would say, Uncle Pete, let me check your pulse ski, because then I started putting ski at the end of everything. And I was pretty little. I was probably like 5 or 6. But I always remember this. And he'd say, sure, Marianne Ski. And he used to let me take his pulse and use my stethoscope. And it's just really cute.
Well, I was the daughter-in-law, and my fondest memory of Pete is riding in a helicopter in Hawaii over the volcanoes, and just sharing that experience with him. And he often recollected that to other people who he would laugh at me because I wanted the helicopter pilot to do crazy things, and the people who shared our helicopter were not feeling it. So, and I also enjoyed just talking, listening to his war stories. He was just a good guy, even-keeled, even-tempered, and just a sweet guy that could talk about anything. So, I'd never seen a military funeral, so that was very, very nice and very emotional.
I remember so many times with my grandpa. I mean, he was with us for more times than I even realized, I guess. Which ones? I don't even know. He was just, I have such a positive memory of my grandfather. He's always laughing. He was always just so positive about everything, and it really influenced me in the way that I live my life. And if only I could be just as positive as he was, I would make the world. It wasn't even a week ago that he and I were sitting in front of a camera like this for our American Idol auditions. It was so great seeing him. We just had a blast, and the fact that everybody recognized him for being so inspirational, as inspirational as I find him, was just such a great moment. It was a memory I will never forget, for sure. Most of the times that I had with my grandpa were in Florida. So I would come down for Disney World, which, to be honest, was a great place to have grandparents living, you know? So we would visit my cousins and my uncle and my grandparents, and we'd all hang out at this house down in Disney World. But I think even more fun than Disney World was going to see my grandparents, you know? So we always had a blast. He was so positive, and just every single time we had down there, it was amazing. Because of him, he was like the father of the entire family.
Actually, my Uncle Pete lived with me and my parents and my grandmother for about 7 years till we moved to Philadelphia. And a few things that I remember about that, and because of Uncle Pete and Aunt Vera, I really wasn't allowed to grow up. I'm now 67, but still referred to as Joey. And also, the famous thing was every Christmas time, my Uncle Pete would buy me a Lionel piece of cloth for my train set. And the typical thing was I used to love pizza. In those days, I would eat a whole pizza myself. And he'd go, Joey, I can't believe you ate the whole pizza yourself. And I remember my grandmother and my mother always beating on Uncle Pete. Pete, you're getting too old. Get married. Get out of the house. Get married. Get out of the house. That's about all I can remember.
Uncle Pete, first I want to thank you for embracing me as an outlaw in the family. When I married Joe, you weren't like an uncle, you were like an old friend, and I always viewed you as an old friend, and I thank you for that.
One other thing, I remember one weekend my Uncle Pete came home with those flags that you hang on the different places when you have a grand opening and so forth. They gave me like 2 sets and we put them all up in the yard, and I played with those things for like 3 weeks. Being so happy about them. That's all.
And Pete, I don't know if you know, but you were Joe's mom, Wanda's favorite brother. Yeah, she just loved you dearly, and it was always, oh Pete, we have to remember Pete's birthday, we have to go visit Pete. So we went to Orlando, and I think you were the biggest Mickey Mouse I've ever met, and you toured us. You were the fantastic tour guide of Disney World, and we'll miss you dearly. We'll miss. I know as years go by, we didn't stay as much in touch, but you don't know, when I turned 65 in November, we were planning to come surprise you and Vera with a visit. So we'll visit you emotionally, and we'll visit Vera physically. So love you, and you're up with the rest of your siblings, playing around.
My main memories is just every day I'd walk into the house and I'd see him sitting there on his little couch, and he'd always be so cheerful and happy, and I remember he'd just sit there and go, "Hey, how's school going? How's life?" And he's so sweet about everything. He'd always hug me and give me a kiss. And I remember too, during especially like holidays and stuff, with like Christmas, we'd always joke around about like getting coal and being bad and all this funny stuff. And he was just so sweet. He'd tell us all the stories of all, like in World War II or whatever, when he fought and stuff, like all this stuff. He'd tell us about him driving the tanks, and it was crazy, it really was. And he definitely is a hero, and he really will be missed. And I just want him to know that me and Kimber, everyone, we dearly love him, and that we will one day be with him, and that I hope he's watching down and looking at this, and I hope he's proud of it. So
well, we used to have lots of memories with Grandpa. Whenever we would both be down in Florida at the same time. I think probably the most memorable ones is when we used to do the fashion shows.
Oh yeah.
Down the hallways of our grandparents' house. So like, sometimes they were, Grandma's clothes or even Grandpa's clothes. Other times it'd be like coming back from Black Friday shopping and
model everything we bought for them.
Yeah, and Grandpa would always make a comment every single time.
Yeah. Like some of them he would be like, he was so like straightforward about it too. It's hilarious. Like he would be sitting there and be like, "Oh, that's nice," and then we'd all be like, "Well, what do you think?" And then, "That one's okay," or so many different things. I know he enjoyed it.
Yeah, he's always
definitely.
Yeah, I just remember him being like, "Ooh, nice girls, like looking nice," you know.
Of course.
He was such a great grandpa to both of us.
Oh yeah, he really was.
We have so many memories.
Oh yeah.
Funny Valentine, sweet comic Valentine, you make me smile with my heart. Your looks are laughable, unphotographable, yet you're my favorite work of art. Is your figure less than careful